How y'all doing? Good. Excited to be at Drupal Camp Atlanta?
Yes.
Yes. I missed Paris, so this is the hurrah for me. But I am nonetheless, I will not be swayed. The only thing that really has me here and not Paris, or not both, is money, which is unfortunate. 5 hours is a lot better than the flight across the pond. So.
I hear Atlanta's the next best thing.
That's that. You know, I read that in the brochure.
That's what we call it.
Yeah. I do like that you had an IKEA here. That's the first thing that brought me to Atlanta. I drove 5 hours to go to IKEA. And like 2 months later, they opened one in Charlotte. So I was like, oh, Newman. And there was a tornado while we were here. Like we were in the hotel room, like 5 a.m. Like sirens are blaring, and I'm like, what? Are we being bombed? Like, are the Germans coming? I don't know what's going on right now. So we got in the bathroom for a while, and I was streaming the internet radio to know it was safe to go back into my hotel room. So that was my first experience in Atlanta. So this is my second. Hopefully it will be a lot better. Welcome to There's a Hook for That, Extending Drupal and Beginning Module Development. What I wanted to do was, my background was I came into Drupal from a programming general background. I was a computer science major. I did some programming. I got into the web stuff with my first few jobs out of college, and I really liked doing the web stuff, and I started building websites on the side, and I was building custom CMSs basically and selling them to clients, real custom PHP stuff. And then I found Drupal, and as many of you may know, I was just blown away. I was so happy that there was something out there that solved the problems that I had to reinvent every time. User authentication, WYSIWYG editing, content management, all that stuff was solved. But as a programmer, I sort of branched out from there and I said, well, now there's stuff that Drupal cannot do. A lot of times that's integrating with legacy systems or some other database, or moving data around to some proprietary something or other, and anything like that. There's a lot of stuff that Drupal can't do, but what makes Drupal awesome is your ability to make it do what you want. As a consultant, a lot of times what I find out in the world about what people know about Drupal is Drupal is a content management system. And my firm, Redfin Solutions, we started as like a freelance on the side thing, and now it's what I do full time, run this Drupal consultancy. And one of the hardest things I have trouble doing with new clients is convincing them that Drupal is more than a content management system. Drupal is an application development framework. It lets you build any web application that you want. Because what's a web application? You put a bunch of forms up, you let people fill out the data, you process the form, and you do something with it. And Drupal lets you do that and solves a lot of the issues surrounding that. So I came into Drupal knowing some programming, but not knowing how Drupal worked. And so that's what I really want to attack here with beginning module development. If you walk in, you know how to program, I know how to write code, but I don't know what Drupal really does. Who's done some programming before? Good, most of you, that's excellent. And PHP specifically? Yeah, a lot. Okay, very good. So up at Appalachian State in North Carolina, in the area where I'm from, where I just finished my graduate work, they're actually making a big push, and they're converting all their departmental websites to Drupal from a custom PHP website, an old CMS that was developed at the university. So getting people to let go up there of PHP website was a little tricky from what I've heard, but they eventually adopted Drupal. They saw how great it was. And one of the taglines that kept coming up when they were trying to do this sale was, don't worry, there's a module for that. There's a module for that. No, don't worry, there's a module for that. And so I was ultimately going to give a training over there at App, and that's what I decided this would be called, There's a Hook for That. Because if there's not a module for that, there's a hook for that, almost in every case. So that's what I want to kind of introduce to you here today, is the concept of the hook system in Drupal and how it lets you build the applications that you want to build. So getting into it, there's the basic anatomy of a Drupal module, 3 files. There's the info file and the module file, which is a lot of the code. That's the real guts of it. And there may or may not be an install file depending on what your module does. If it needs to run anything at install time, run install time, or it uses its own database tables and that kind of thing. So that's the anatomy of a basic Drupal module. Now you can download Drupal modules like Devel or some of these views, these beasts, and you'll see tons and tons of other files in there. And they can be included through Drupal's APIs and that kind of thing, but I'm going to focus on these three main areas, the real anatomy, the real core of building simple Drupal modules. So the info file, that's a good place to start, and that's pretty much where I start every time, and you have to have this. So for me, it just makes sure that I can start my development. So the info file, it registers your module with Drupal. The info file is what tells Drupal, hey, I've got a module here, I've got some code, I implement some hooks, and you're going to want to execute this code that I'm telling you about. So the info file, I always start there and I write that and get that going. It's any file syntax. If anyone's familiar with Windows.ini files, it's basically name value pairs and semicolons for comments. So name, description, and core, these are three required fields for your info file of your module. Name says what the name of the module is. And this is it can have spaces, it can be a descriptive name, it's a long name. It's not your sort of code name. A lot of times in Drupal, for example, with CCK fields, you have to add the human name and the computer name, which has no spaces and is typically all lowercase. Same idea here. Your computer name of your module is the name that precedes the dot of .info. Okay? And then the name here that goes inside the info file, sort of the human readable name of your module. Description, I write after that, and that is a longer description, like a sentence description of what your module does. And then core describes what major version of Drupal this module is written for. So 5.x, 6.x, 7.x, because we're getting there pretty soon, Code Pros. And then there are some optional ones, but they are often used. Package and dependencies. And what package does is it describes essentially which field set on that admin build modules page your thing shows up in. So if you were writing a module to extend views, you'd probably say package equals views, and it'll show up in that field set. What I do a lot of times, if I'm writing custom modules for clients, I'll make one called custom, or one called, the site name or the company name or the client name, and throw all my stuff in there so that you can readily identify, if they don't go with me anymore or they hire an in-house developer, they know all these modules are ones that were custom written. They're not from, I can't download the updates from Drupal.org. I got to write the updates myself. And dependencies is frequently used as well. And dependencies tells Drupal, don't allow this module to be enabled unless this other one is enabled as well. Because my module is calling functions that exist in the dependency. So if I'm extending views and I'm using a bunch of views functions, or just I need views to exist before my module even makes sense, I would add a dependency to views. And I've shared this, by the way, if you want to follow along over on Bitly, these links are clickable. This is just a link over to Drupal.org's description of the info file. So there are more than these 5 values that can go into your info file, but again, I'm trying to hit the basics, the things that I use almost every time when I'm developing custom modules. So, if you use a PHP function that only exists in PHP 5.2 or greater, there's another one called PHP, and you can set the minimum PHP version you need, for example. There's other things that are part of this info file package, but these are some of the most basic. So looking at what an info file really looks like, it looks like these name value pairs. The one thing to point out about dependencies is that it's an array, and my square brackets don't really have any space between them, but that's what it is. It's array syntax. Left square bracket, right square bracket. So you're adding to the array. This module is dependent on views. This module is also dependent on taxonomy. Both these modules need to be enabled before you can enable mine, because I need their code. Okay. So, all right. What I'm going to do, network error. somewhere here I have, you know. All right. So what I'm going to do is create a module here as we go, something real small and basic. Site tweaks is a very popular module that I use on almost every site because someone inevitably comes along and says, I want to change this description that can't be changed, you know, in the UI, description on a form or something like that. You can also use theme functions to do that kind of thing, but for our sake, we'll use a module. So I'll just say this is the info file for site tweaks.module, something like that. So I need everything I described before as required. Name equals site tweaks, and a description I need, sundry site tweaks for this site, and a core. I'll be dependent on 6x. All this, everything I'm going to describe to you is for 6x, but it's very similar in 5 and in 7. The APIs change, but you can always look that up on the API site. Let's see. I'm going to put this in a package called custom, and no dependencies at this point. So where I want to save this is in my Drupal ATL. If I get there, this is my Drupal main directory. You know, some of this looks familiar, cron and index and install and all that. So I'm going to put mine in sites, all, modules, and I'm going to create my new custom folder in here. And I called it site tweaks. So I'll just use site tweaks here as the folder name. And I'll use site tweaks.info right here. So in my sites all modules site tweaks folder, I've now started to develop my module. So, all right. So I've got my base Drupal install. Looks like Garland, so you know it's very vanilla. And I've got like 7 nodes that I created with devel, generate, nice, beautiful Latin text. And I'm going to go up to my modules page. And theoretically, what I should see is not here. All right, what did I do wrong? Well, we'll talk hypothetically for now.
Could you need to maybe flush the cache?
That's a mystery. That's incidentally, I was going to point out that flushing the cache tends to solve most problems in module development. Always a good first step to go to. But I don't think it's a problem here. Don't see the development. Got 2 theories. Site tweaks.info. Sites on site tweaks. All right, if this ain't it, we're moving on. Let's see. I knew I should have tried this before. Moving right along. I think that is not the right folder, but I'm not going to waste your time figuring that out in front of you. So this is the core syntax of the info file. Key value pairs registers your module with Drupal. Okay? So, getting hooked. Unlike for this fishy here, hooks are your friends in Drupal. What hooks are, in essence, is they pull in your module into the core. They grab it and they say, oh, this is your code. What do you want to do with these Drupal objects? So they give you the opportunity to act on Drupal objects, often at a very particular time when that object is being manipulated. Okay? So that's the key. You can act on Drupal objects at particular times by implementing a hook. Okay? So some of the, before I get into the hooks, some very useful information here. The Drupal API site is awesome. I have my own Firefox search plugin just for the Drupal API site, just to save me that step when I go to look up what is the API for a particular function. I'm there constantly. The other thing that's very useful when you're talking about module development, one of the things that is really critical, is using forms. You need to register some forms, and you need to, that would be awful if my online presentation can't advance. So the Forms API reference is also there on api.drupal.org. Okay? And some other really helpful modules are Trace and Devel. Okay? What Trace I learned about at DrupalCon DC and fell in love with it. And Devel is practically indispensable. What Trace does is you can log what hooks are firing at what times. A lot of times what happens, you develop a custom module and you're trying to alter something from another module like CCK. You can see, the reason that the CCK fields aren't in the Drupal node object by the time my thing is trying to do it is because mine has fired first. And then CCK fires. But I need to fire after CCK. So Trace will show you if that kind of thing is happening. And incidentally, what you do for that is increase your module's weight in the system table to be a lower number, and it will fire after. Now that's, of course, only if you're on the same op and the same hook, which we'll get to. The other functions for debugging that I think are indispensable, that I use a lot, I log to the watchdog with my own debug section, or sometimes my redfin section, or something like that. And if you use print R of an object, and as the second parameter give it true, or Boolean true, it'll take your rendered print R to a string so that you can send it to the watchdog. Because normally regular print R without that will just print it, flush it right to the output buffer. We don't want to do that. We want to print it out, render this array all pretty as a string, send that over to the watchdog. I'm not breaking this site. I do this on a lot of live sites that I need to debug. I don't want to start printing stuff to the screen, especially Drupal objects. So I'll log them over to the watchdog. That's restricted for admin access, and I will move on and go look at it there. dprintar, if you can print to the string, this is provided by the Devel module, and this will format it nicely and put it in a little pre-formatted box that's scrollable, so it doesn't, if you print this huge object, it doesn't take up your whole screen. So the Devel module gives you dprintar as well.
So as long as that Devel module is installed and that function is available anywhere in any code, whether it's a theme or another module or whatever I'm going to write.
Absolutely. Yep, as long as Devel's enabled, because all that's really happening is a PHP require or include. So that code is somewhere in the scope and you can use it as long as that module is enabled. That's incidentally what enabling a module does, is just require those .module files and include that PHP in the overall grand script. So, very useful stuff for while you're doing development. And so to use a hook to actually say to Drupal, hey, when you do this thing with this object, I got something for you. I want to crack at that. So to implement a hook, to use a hook, you implement the function and you replace hook with your module's programmatic name. Okay? Let's see what happens if I hit next. All right, I'll take it. For example, hook form alter. That's how you'd look it up on api.drupal.org. You will look for hook form alter. But you don't implement hook form alter. You don't create a function called hook form alter. Because if everyone did that, 5 modules did that, there'd be a namespace collision. So the way that Drupal does it is it uses that programmatic name. So for me, if this was working, it would be, I would make a new function called site tweaks form alter with that all one word site tweaks. Okay? And these are the parameters that it gets. I go and look these up every time on api.drupal.org. I don't have any of these memorized, and I do a lot of custom development. So very important site to utilize there. Form, when you use hook form alter, form is a giant array built according to the forms API. So that looks like, all right. If you wanted to say add a new form element, I would give that form element a name, tweak, something like that. And this is an array. So I'm just adding to this big old form array. Anyone from C or PHP recognize the ampersand on form? Pass by reference. That means I can modify that object directly in my function. So as long as I use $form, I can add an element, a keyed element to this array. And I might add something that has, I'm going to add a text field. Text field. No, that's right. And there's all kinds of different things that you can do to forms here. You can also go in if, tweak doesn't exist. So this is how I would add a text field. But I can go anywhere in that form, something that already exists, and also change one of its values. For example, if there were a CCK field already there, I could say, change forms, form of like whatever the CCK field was. That would not be a valid name, but, and say that it's pound description, which is all spelled out. That's what shows up in that tiny text right under a text field. If it didn't have one, I could add it here. Or if it didn't, if it did have one, I can change it. I can override it here by altering the form. So form alter, what that really does is give you the opportunity to change or add to forms before they're displayed. Okay. What form you actually care about is the form ID. So maybe the first thing you do in your function is if form ID equals whatever the form name is. I think one of the things that the trace module also does is it'll show you the form ID. So you go visit the page, and you'll see that it's called, page node form. If you were trying to add a checkbox or something to the, create content page form, you can see what that ID was, so that you can test against it. Well, this would be poor syntax. So you can test against it and say, I want to alter this form. Incidentally, this is something that I actually learned while writing this presentation. You can actually now in 6 use hook form ID alter. There's actually a hook that includes the form ID. So you can avoid testing. Personal preference, this, hook form alter in general is called every time there's a form. So to avoid a little bit of overhead, you might want to just use the function that's for your form ID. Maybe you just want, if you're altering like 3 forms all relative to the same thing, maybe you just want to use hook form alter so you know all that code is in the same place. As long as your site's performing, it's basically a personal preference. So that is form. I don't typically use form state when I'm just altering a form. Usually I'm adding a field to it or something. I will alter the form directly. Form state starts to matter a little bit later, like when you're processing forms.
So when you're writing that function, if you're not using form state, then what does it look like?
It looks similar to form. It's not empty. And to be honest with you, I don't know what it's really holding at that point, because I never used it. So that's what I'll tell you at this point. So let's say you go and you add some text field with form alter to page node form. Okay? So I go to create content and I create a new page. With hook form alter, usually a page has a title and a body. But let's say for some crazy reason I add a checkbox using hook form alter to say display in bold. I don't know, something weird like that. What I need to do is actually do something with it. If I just add it to the form and I don't do anything with it, all I've got is a useless checkbox. It doesn't really do anything. So if I had altered a node form, then I would use a new hook, a different hook node API. Okay. And what node API does is it allows you to act on nodes at different points. Okay? And again, you see the ampersand, so the node itself is a changeable object. You can alter the node before it gets saved to the database, or immediately after it gets saved to the database, or when you're loading a node from the database. You can make these changes. A common scenario is if I alter the node form. I use hook form alter and I alter the page node form. And I add my little checkbox. I now have this data, but I don't know what to do with it. So what I would typically do is on op equals insert, I would then take that node ID from the node that just got saved in all the core tables, and I would take that node ID and in my table that I created, save the value of that checkbox, 1 or 0, or maybe just 1, depending on what you want to do. So this is where that particular time comes into play. Node is the object, and then op is what's happening to the object right now. So hook node API actually gets called multiple times, depending on what's happening. For example, if you switch on or do an if op equals pre-save, you get a snapshot of that node right before it goes into the Drupal database. So you can alter values. For example, if I checked a box to, I don't know, enforce a 500 character limit, that would be ridiculous because Drupal already can do that, but let's say that's what I was doing. I could go in pre-save, see that that box was checked when you hit save, trim the node body there before it goes into the database. That's pre-save. There's another op called insert. Insert is right after the core portion has been saved. Okay, what do you want to do? You would use insert if you need the node ID, for example, from the node that was just created because you need it as a foreign key in your table. So you would use insert there. Load, let's say, we're adding things to the node object there in Drupal. Load would be if someone called node load, or you were loading the node to display it. This is where you can add fields onto the node object. So you might go into your table, grab the field with a DB query, and pop it right onto the node object so that was always available as one of the object properties later on down the line whenever you need that node again. So these are 3 really common ops. There's more than that. There's 8 or 9. And if you look for hook node API on api.drupal.org, you will see all the other ops. There's one for search index. If your module provides text that can be indexed, or you want to be indexed, you can use op equals search index, I believe, and say, oh, go get this and throw it onto this indexable string. There's lots more, so I encourage you to go there. But let's say you do not have a node form. What you actually have is a regular old form that's not really working with nodes, like the contact form, for example. Okay? What you would do there, if you form altered that and added a field to the contact form for some reason, and you need to process that, what Drupal has now are these submit handlers, I guess they'd be called. And that in the form object, so when you implement form alter, you can add to this #submit array a function name that you want to be called when this form is submitted. So the normal form processing can happen. It processes it, it calls the normal function, and if you add to this array with adding a new element onto the array, it will call this function after it calls the normal processing function. What you can also do is, without this, you could completely override the default submit handler. One thing I did recently was with organic groups, when you add a member to the organic group, you need to put their Drupal username in. But we're syncing data in and out with services. People don't really know that this Drupal site is a Drupal site, and all they know is I want to add someone to this mailing list. All I know is their email address. So what I did was I overrode the form submit handler to use my own custom code, and then copied organic groups code and modified it to my liking so that it would actually look up the user by email address, and et cetera, et cetera. that's how you can handle and process forms. And this function name, you can just call function something, whatever you've called it. Generally, it's a good convention to use your module name somewhere in there. I like to use underscore module name. Some people will just start with the module name and then the form name and submit. But whatever function you register here, it's going to call it to process that form. So you get the form, and you also get the form state. And in here, form state starts to be a little bit more valuable. Regular old form is not changeable, but form state is. Form state at this point contains the values that were submitted, the posted values that you actually filled in on that form. So that's how you can alter forms and do something with the data that's in the field that you just added or whatever. Sometimes you implement form alter just to change some text and you don't really care about everything else is already handled and you're just doing something basic. Another thing is you may want to just make your own page. This is where Drupal as an API really starts to kick the tires and light the fires. You can register a path in Drupal. So you always wonder, well, I install a module, I install the devel module, and now I have a /devel/cache clear. How did my module say, here's a path where you can go to and fire some action? And this is how you do it. You use hook menu. So for me, it would be site tweaks _menu. And you return an array of menu items. And this is defined, like what this all looks like is defined in the menu API. If you go to api.drupal.org and look for hook menu, all the documentation of what can go in here is on that page. Okay? So the one in particular that's of importance is the page callback. And you can put some function in here. This is what links it all together. When you visit the URL that you register here. So this would be, if I went to mysite.com/thepath, it will call this function, some function. And what some function does is it returns the output of that page. So I can do a whole bunch of things there to generate output, and I return that HTML string, basically. So this sum function, it returns a string of the HTML that goes in the content variable. It gets displayed there. And you can add multiple items, multiple paths. You can use arguments here, like the user ID, things like that. It's very powerful. Page callback, there's access callback, there's the type of menu item it is. So there's like a regular old menu callback is just the path exists, but I'm not going to add it to like an official menu. But you can also say it's like a menu suggested item, which means it shows up in navigation, but it's disabled by default. So there's a lot of different types of menu items you can add. There's a lot of really cool stuff that happens there, but that's the crux of it there. You register the path, and you register the callback for the path. One thing that you can do is if you want this page to actually be a form, your page callback is Drupal get form, I think. So you put Drupal get form here, and then as a page argument, you pass it the form ID that you're going to build, a totally new form that you register with Drupal.
So I can just create this arbitrary path that this menu item is going to link to. That'll be the URL location that we go to when we click on that, and run a function when that happens.
Exactly.
And that function will just run inside the theme. The theme's going to load, and the content pane, all my other modules are going to load, I guess.
Depending on if there's a hook that's kind of being implemented for your thing.
Your function will have to call a theme to get the theme to actually render.
Gotcha. So if I did that and wrote a function that just processed some data, I'd have just a white screen or whatever my output from that function would be.
Yeah,
You decide what you want the output to be.
What this is really returning is getting pushed onto the, if you're familiar with themes, the content variable. So what you return here, if I was in Garland and I returned hi, I would see the menu bars, all my blocks, everything, and then on the white space, all I'd see is the word hi. So whatever you return there will show up in your content. And you can do anything in that function. I've registered listeners for things to post data to. and I can just take that posted data and process it and save a node. This was like the most thrilling thing I've done in 2 weeks, which speaks to my life, but I've got, if anyone's heard of Mozilla Ubiquity, I'm actually posting, I use GTD to try to get things done. I can actually, from Ubiquity, type in something to add to my inbox, it'll post it to this listener, and Drupal will save a new node. Okay, so it's pretty cool. It's not secure at all, so I have to, anyone can start adding stuff to my inbox, so I'm not going to tell you more about it. Yeah, so that is hook menu. That's how you really link up the real raw power of Drupal as an API. You want to mess around with users, there's a hook for that. So with hook user, if my module were site tweaks, I'd have a function called site tweaks user, and it gets some parameters as well that you can mess with. Inserting a user after they've registered and their form validated and we're ready. Okay, we're going to insert a user. We can do other things. We can take values off that form and save it away, or process it, or ping a remote listener, whatever we want to do. Load, same as with nodes, but it's a different object. So as a user is loaded, if you want to pack additional information onto the user object. If you, for example, if you have the profile module, that's what it does. When hook user is called with op equal load, it goes into the profile values table for the user in question, loads all the data, and drops it onto the user object. That's how you get user, arrow, full name, or whatever your profile fields are, right on the user object. Submit is like pre-save for nodes. So it's been submitted, but I haven't saved the user yet. And there's many more. There's a lot more ops, a lot more things that happen to users. And you can, again, look on api.drupal.org for this function, and it'll tell you what they are. So depending on what you're trying to do, you can look and find the right one. Okay. Edit contains the form values. So if this was the user registration form, and you wanted to look at what they entered as their username, and maybe check it against a remote database because you're syncing your Drupal data off somewhere else, you can grab that from the edit and look at it and do your comparison that you need to do. Account is the user account info. For a new user, this doesn't really tell you much, but if it was load, the account would be populated with the data. Category is a category, so profile module sort of introduced the concept of categories. So there's a default category of null, which is your regular user edit page, like your username and your password and your theme. But if you were on the next sub-tab, like membership information, where you enter your full name and your membership ID and favorite color, and you have a category that's called membership information, you can look and see, well, is this hook being called for the one thing I care about, for the membership information?
Yeah. If you know the API function that you need to find out more information about, it's easy to go to api.drupal.org, type it in. Well, how do you find the function that you need to know when you don't know what it is already?
What I do, I go to pound Drupal in IRC, because that's where the programming questions are asked, and I say, I want to blah-bitty-blah this blah-bitty-blah. I want to mess with this node, or I want to delete this user. Whatever it is, I fill in the blanks, and I say, what hook do I use? And typically, if I harass enough, they will say, hook user with op equals insert. And I'll say, okay, I know what that means now. I go and find it.
So there isn't some fancy smancy search trick?
Other things that I do is I will go to api.drupal.org and do a partial match search. So I think what I have to do is something with a menu. Like, Devel provides some menu items, but I want to alter them. So I'm just going to type in menu and hit search, and I'm going to look at all the menu functions. There's a function name, or a hook name, or a function name, and a description. So I'll be like, oh, hook menu alter. That sounds right. Let's see what that does. So partial searching on the API site works occasionally.
Do you think that that might be an area of enhancement for API, is to build a little stronger search tool, especially for guys that are just trying to learn what all they can do? It's like you don't know enough to even know what to ask.
Yeah. Well, thankfully you're at this session, so that's a good first start. These are really the most popular hooks. to implement.
I'll tell you something in that vein that's helped
Mhm.
me a lot is dissection of other modules.
Yeah,
So
I know
a
that.
lot of times
Yeah.
you can go in and search for whatever it is, the action that you're wanting to perform.
Okay.
And you may not find it exactly for your scenario, but you can typically find somebody that's implemented it in a similar way and just dissect their module and figure out how they implemented it.
Like, oh man, I know Devel module does this.
Exactly.
You can at least know, and especially if you know, like, oh, it does it at this path. So I'll go into hook menu in Devel module, find the path, see what its page callback is, because I know that now from coming to this session, and I'll go to the page callback function and see what that's doing and start rifling through. That's a good point.
I have a similar question for you. What do you recommend as far as documentation or books, basically, to get started into this? Is it pro development, Drupal pro development? Is that pretty much the Bible?
The first thing I can say is I've never bought a Drupal book, so I've used the site and the IRC. That's where I've done a lot of the dissection of other modules. Pro Drupal development is the only book, having not used any of them, that I say is pretty de facto standard. Pro Drupal development.
Package module development looks pretty good too.
Yeah, I like that.
Addison told me of another book last night. I'll not tell you what it is.
Learning Drupal 6 module development. is
Yeah,
something I like.
yeah, that's a package, yeah.
There's other hooks. Starting to get the picture. You can hook into cron. So when cron runs, you want to do something. Every hour I want to like go and look and ping this listener. I want to, search implements hook cron to go in and index new items. Hook search. So if your search results are coming back and you want to add something into the search result that comes back, like a particular field from your module, you can implement hook search. You can implement hook block for your module to create blocks programmatically that you can add in. Hook install and hook uninstall, those are what go in that .install file, that third piece of the skeleton. So if my module is doing what I said before, taking a value from a form and saving it to a separate database table, I need to install that schema. I need to install that database table to the Drupal database when my module gets enabled. And when my module gets disabled or, well, uninstalled truly, I can delete that table and all that data and all those variables. So hook install and uninstall lets you do that, manage that schema. Hook help will implement some help for your module. Hook theme, if you have themable functions, if you've worked in the theme layer and you've called theme table and you pass it its parameters, if you want to register your own thing, like theme my box, you would register that so the theme registry knows it exists. Permissions, if you want to add a new permission for your module, like if your module is something that you only want to allow certain people to do that's not already there, like access administration pages or something like that, but you want like, can edit my profile information, whatever it is. You can add new permissions here using hook perm, hook taxonomy, and there's more. And there's an infinite number because modules can create their own hooks. For example, if anyone's used the devel generate module, all that Latin text, when I call devel generate and I have CCK fields in my nodes, those actually get populated with text, but not really by the devel generate module, by the CCK module, implementing hook generate or hook generate content or something like that. The devel module goes out and says, do any of you other modules, I'm generating some content right now. Do any of you modules have stuff for me? If you implement that hook, you can say, yeah, this is, when you're generating content, this is what I want my module to do. So your modules can then implement hooks that other things can be added to. For example, I've been working with the Ping FM module a little bit with Rob Loach, and I have one called Ping FM block, and all it does is take your latest Ping FM and put it in a block on your site, if you're like kind of a one-person site or a blog. What I do is I implement like hook Ping FM callback or something like that. I don't really know. I've done work on .go, like a free SMS service. I wrote a very small module, and all it does is implement hooks that will allow other modules to do things when a text message comes in. That is it, and I am 4 minutes short, so other questions? Yes, sir.
All right. Very general question about your first point about discovering Drupal as a development framework. Do you ever find yourself going back out into any other NVC frameworks to get stuff done, or are you pretty much settled into Drupal?
We specialize in Drupal as a firm, so if we ever find something that we say this is not the right tool for Drupal, we'll tell our client to go somewhere else. So we don't do it. On the other hand, you can imagine, I've never said that. I know Drupal can do it because at the root of all web applications is take a form, you process the data in that form, you're done. So if you need to save it somewhere, it's a Drupal node. And if I just need to process it, I just have my page callback, do that processing. In the back.
Are there any special editors where you just put like a JavaScript in the content and then it just saves the content and then the JavaScript appears once you upload the page? Like, I know there's a program called Sorcerer. You just put your JavaScript between the Sorcerer and it appears. There's a Drupal like that?
I am not familiar with anything like that. There may or may not be.
Pretty much have to call all JavaScript through custom Drupal.
In the front?
I have to look at it. Is there a module that's sort of like Zen for the theme world, where it's kind of like a skeleton module you can just go in and put your functions in? Like module developer module or something like that?
Not that I know of, but what I use for that is there's like a tutorial on module development that's on the Drupal site that walks you through here's some of the hooks and here's how you implement them. But I don't know of anything like that, but that would be pretty cool just to create a shell with all the hooks in it. But those hooks will be called if they're present, so you kind of do add some overhead, but it's the kind of thing you could trim out later before the module goes live. So that would be a neat idea, but I don't know of anything like that.
I think it's called a coder module.
Yeah, that's the one.
Just install it.
Oh yeah, I should have. Yeah, that's a good point. Most of my custom code I don't contribute back to Drupal because it's some proprietary thing that either doesn't make sense or someone doesn't want me to. Usually I find it just doesn't make sense because it's interacting with some legacy system. The coder module I probably should have added to that set of tools, Devel and Trace. The coder is really good. It will catch a lot of your Drupal errors and it will format your white space according to Drupal specs and that kind of thing too. So coder module. So it does do that. It implements some of those hooks and draws them for you. So that's cool.
Can you put up a link to your slideshow again?
Oh yeah.
Maybe that'll be it.
No, that was not the right button. Right on top, it is bit.ly/K9UNN. And what I'll do, bit.ly I think is fleeting and temporary, so I'll go back and post this on the Redfin Solutions blog, and I'll put the link up there. So if you want to find this again, you can go to redfinsolutions.com and find it through our blog. Good. And it is 11:59. Anything else up here?
I have one question about something you said in the presentation. Where you're talking about the weight of something. You just change the weight. But why wouldn't you put that change in the description instead of saying like load this first and then load something, load A then load B, as opposed to just changing the weight?
What actually determines what modules fire in what order is a field in a database table. So changing it in the description wouldn't be useful. For example, if 3 functions implement op presave in hook node API, and they both have module weight 0, you don't know which one's going to fire first. But if you need the presave from a previous module to run before your presave runs, increase your module weight. So if it's 0, make yours 1. And that is in the system table of your Drupal database, and I don't know that there's a module or a UI to change that. I go into MySQL, into PHP-MyAdmin or whatever, and I change the module weight there. That rarely comes up. Usually what's happening is you're calling the wrong op. So it needs to do it on pre-save, and then you're doing it on pre-save, and you're like, where's the node ID? Probably you want to call later op, but it does happen where they're both pre-save, they're both module weight 0, and the wrong one's being called in order, and you can adjust yours. That's the module.
There is a module weight module
to drag them around and
Yep.
stuff. Is it draggable, like with the UI?
I think it's just
Set.
negative, yeah, it's just the numbers, it lists all the module weights, we just increase the.
All right. Thanks, all. That was
Thank you.
great for me.